Hello and welcome to Sustainability Uncovered from Edie, the podcast for anyone working in or passionate about sustainability and climate action. Today's episode is all about embodied carbon. Building energy use and operational emissions are a key focus for property managers and homeowners, but what about the carbon that's already baked in before tenants even step foot inside? Coming up in today's episode, we sit down with Kingspan and Tate Global to discuss the practicalities of cutting embodied emissions in a real-world commercial project.
Sustainability wasn't an add-on here. It was built into the project from the beginning and part of the design brief. And I think it's a great proof point for how a portfolio, and our portfolio in particular, and strategy can support real-world decarbonisation.
Then, the Director of Structures at Canary Wharf Group shares how innovative material inputs could help to reshape the future of sustainable construction.
We challenged Holcim and said, well, if you could make it from any organic material, could you potentially make it from the spent coffee grounds that we collect? And we did a trial and it proved it could be made into biochar.
All of that and more in this episode of Sustainability Uncovered. Hello and welcome along to Sustainability Uncovered, hosted by Edie, the UK's longest running business-to-business media brand focused on all things environmental sustainability. So we're just wrapping up the first week of June 2026 and you're listening to the voice of Edie's acting content editor, Matilda. So I'm joined today by our senior reporter, Sidhi.
Hello.
So we're not in our usual studio location in East Grinstead, we're out and about in London. Hey Sidhi, how are you doing?
Yeah, good. No, actually, I can get used to this. It's a fantastic place. It's called the Wintry, next to the bank station. If any of you are looking for a nice food spot, which I've just turned into like a food journalist here. After the climate.
We're pivoting.
Yeah, doing fine. It's just been really busy few months, I think, for the team as well. And with Sarah going on the maternity leave, a lot has changed.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot has kept us busy.
A lot to be keeping busy with, and obviously as a British podcast we'd be remiss not to talk about the weather, and you wouldn't know it looking outside because it's been on and off pouring down today, but last week was a bit of an unbearable heat wave. I was definitely struggling.
No, definitely struggling as well. I got bad migraines and I couldn't really travel into office the entire week. I have these massive glass balcony windows in my apartment, so we were just in there baking,
melting.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it got really hot, and it's after a while that England has seen 38 degrees Celsius in May.
Yeah,
it's absolutely bonkers what's happening with the weather.
I mean, it does just go to show climate change. It's not a distant scenario. It's already happening. And it was quite fortuitous timing, the heat wave, because I think it was, a week after the Climate Change Committee's well-adapted UK report, because it did just go to show how poorly prepared we are at the moment for climate change impacts, whether that is extreme heat, but also water management and drought and flooding. And even though adapting and implementing all the measures that we need to implement is going to cost a lot of money, the report highlights that the cost of us not doing anything is just going to be far, far greater, both financially and in terms of the social impact as well.
Definitely. And for example, we saw supermarkets lose access to cooling because the coolers just gave up in how hot it got. And that's a lot of food waste there, and the health impact that also arises from the lack of access to water and ice and cool beverages when people are hot and out and about. It's massive. So yeah, definitely puts it into perspective that the cost of implementing and preparing for what's about to come, because the UN's announced that it's only gonna get more intense as the year progresses, and it's not the first of the extreme weather events that we're going to be seeing from what we have already seen with the WMO report and regular UN warnings.
Yeah, the report suggested that if the UK specifically doesn't do anything, and if we're seeing a 2-degree warming scenario, which is likely by 2050, it could cost us, it was up to 5% of GDP, so that's like £260 billion. Is there anything else that's been on your agenda in the last few weeks, Sidhi?
Yeah, only recently the UK government announced its proposed level for the 7th carbon budget. So the government's aiming to reduce total greenhouse gas emissions by around 87% by 2042, which is a great announcement to wake up to, honestly. And we've seen from the green economy and the reaction that we've received as well, it's been largely welcome. Now people just want to see it being backed by a credible plan. So that's very refreshing to see. I think also there's just been so much attacking happening on climate and ESG right now, which I don't understand because the impact of climate change has never been more evident. So it was great to see that from the government. What else has been happening? I there's a lot that's about to happen as well that I like to flag. We're a few days away from the Bonn Climate Conference. So that will essentially outline what will be the focus for COP31. And a lot's happening in the net zero world right now. We have had so many frameworks and tools and guides being launched to help corporates, financial institutions develop their own transition plans, their net zero strategies. The SBTi is due to publish their updated net zero standard as well, which is going to be big for every company out there. So yeah, a lot to cover.
Yeah. So on the topic of climate adaptation, when we talk about future-proofing our built environment and preparing them for climate change, that's only sort of one side of the coin. So the other is also making sure that our buildings are continuing to decarbonise and do their bit to help get the world to net zero. At the moment, the built environment accounts for around 40% of the world's energy-related emissions, and embodied carbon, so that's all the emissions that are generated across the extraction, the manufacturing, the transportation of the raw materials, and then the construction and disposal of those materials at the end. That makes up about 11% of global energy-related emissions. And the World Green Building Council estimates that that's only going to keep rising, and embodied carbon is set to constitute over half of the built environment's emissions over the next decade. So it's a key part of the construction industry's focus when it comes to becoming more sustainable and more future-proofed. So on that topic, for our first interview today, I sat down with Holly Loughman, who's the head of sustainability at Kingspan Group, and Michael Hatton-Evans, who's a specification manager at Tate Global, and they shared a bit more information about a commercial refurb project here in London and how they managed to cut embodied carbon. So here is that interview now in full. So thanks so much for your time. I hope you're both keeping as cool as possible as we touch wood kind of near the end of this pretty brutal heat wave. So to start, if I could just ask each of you to give a quick intro of who you are, what your role is.
Yeah, great to be here, and I'm just about surviving the heat wave. Thank you for the opportunity to chat with you today. Briefly, I've been at Tate, previously Kingspan Access Floors, so we rebranded in 2025. I've been with Tate for 3 years now. My role as specification manager is covering the UK and Ireland for raised access floor opportunities, so mostly dealing with architects and other specification influencers.
Great, thanks Matilda. Lovely to be here today, and yes, as Michael said, surviving the heat wave, although I don't think it's quite as hot here in Ireland as it has been in the UK. My name is Holly Loughman. I'm the head of sustainability at Kingspan Group. So what that means is we look after our Planet Passionate sustainability strategy, which includes all reporting requirements and also expands to cover our full value chain, including own operations, projects, raw materials and circularity. I've been with Kingspan for the last 6 years, and I started as a research and development engineer and then moved into the sustainability space. So very happy to talk to you today.
And one of the focuses for today is obviously the 40 Grosvenor Place redevelopment. For listeners who may not know about the project, could you start by explaining maybe what the original ambition was behind it and what you think kind of makes it such a standout project? Michael, if I could come to you first.
Yes, so 40 Grosvenor Place is a landmark London building. It's located in Belgravia. The 6-storey building has recently undergone a Cat A redevelopment, and this was designed by the London architectural firm Bar Gazettas, and they were briefed to deliver an exceptional performance and occupant well-being, providing more than 81,000 square foot of flexible office accommodation. It's a really great project to be involved with. Project targeted global leading BREEAM Outstanding and WellCore Gold certification, so the client really set out from the start that sustainability was a key driver. For Tate, or Kingspan Access Floors, the story really goes back to 1998, when the building was first designed by Hop Architects At that time, Tate were involved in the original installation of the raised floors. Fast forward almost 30 years now, and Tate UK are now back on site delivering a hybrid solution designed to enhance both sustainability and functionality, supporting the building's transformation into flexible high-performance office space. So during the specification stage, which is what I like to get stuck into, we worked with the client team to specify a hybrid solution. And this consisted of RMG 600 Plus, so that is our flagship lower embodied carbon product made with 91% recycled material. And then alongside this, the reclaimed panels were supplied by the client from the existing building stock. So really making use of the assets that they've got within the existing building there. And what makes this project particularly significant is that it demonstrates circular construction in practice, combining reuse, material efficiency and embodied carbon reduction within a live evolving building. Working closely with the key stakeholders, the shared objective was to deliver a high performance building while meaningfully reducing embodied carbon through practical specification led decisions.
Hey, and Holly, maybe over to you as well.
Yeah, brilliant. I think you've captured a lot of it already there, Michael, but really from my perspective, kind of in Kingspan Group, what makes 40 Grosvenor Place so valuable for us is that it brings together several elements of our Planet Passionate strategy, and it's a great example of that strategy actually in action. The built environment, as you know, many of you might be aware, is 37% of the annual energy related emissions globally come from the built environment, and it also consumes over 38 billion tonnes of material annually, which is just a huge proportion. And because of that, and because buildings are responsible for such a large proportion of our global footprint, improving how they are built and perform is one of the most effective ways to tackle climate change and help accelerate circularity. The goal of our Planet Passionate programme is to reduce the environmental impact of our products while maintaining their high performance. And this is to help customers reduce operational and embodied carbon of their projects. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. This project brings together lower embodied carbon solutions, products designed with recycled content and reused materials. And I suppose a little bit beyond that, it also reflects a bit of a shift in the market. As Michael said, sustainability wasn't an add-on here. It was built into the project from the beginning and part of the design brief. And I think it's a great proof point for how a portfolio, and our portfolio in particular, and strategy can support real-world decarbonisation.
And you touched on this already, the fact that cutting embodied carbon was a central focus of the project from the start. But at what point did it kind of move from being this broad goal to being a core part of either the commercial or the design decision making?
Yeah, so as you say, the goal was set out early, and as well as that, the raised access flooring package was identified as a key driver for carbon reduction at a very early stage. So with a lot of projects we see within either the planning documents, sustainability reports, the early design stages, that they will outline particular products. It might even be a product set that they need to look at as a key target. So once Tate were brought into the conversation, we could build on the design team's ambition, first off exploring our LEC RMG 600 Plus system, so LEC being an acronym for our lower embodied carbon products, and that's throughout Kingspan Group as well. That's not exclusive to Tate, so each division will have their own LEC range, whilst at the same time reviewing that potential where the client has set out for reusing the existing assets that they've got in the building. By that I mean specifically the raised access flooring panels. So following rounds of panel validation, mock-ups, cleaning, demonstrations and collaborative design and risk mitigation meetings with all of the stakeholders, reuse started to become a reality, and a hybrid solution consisting of new and reclaimed materials started to take direction and continue into the construction phase.
And obviously increasingly sustainability needs to be a big focus for clients, and embodied carbon is a huge part of that. Do you find that there's still kind of maybe a misconception with clients about what embodied carbon means and how you can go about reducing it?
Yeah, definitely. For me, I would say it is transportation, and that it's being the biggest culprit towards embodied carbon. So many people, myself included in that in the past, would often assume that shipping heavy building materials like steel and concrete thousands of miles generates the bulk of embodied carbon. You can see how easily you'd make that assumption. However, transportation actually accounts for a surprisingly small fraction of embodied emissions. The vast majority of the carbon footprint comes from raw material extraction and the industrial manufacturing processes of the supply chain.
And Holly, what's one misconception that you think clients still have?
It's probably the same, and I think it's a really good point, Michael. Even looking at our group footprint, the question we probably get asked the most is the transportation impacts, and it's significantly less than our raw material footprint, and that's why that's a huge part of our strategy. And it really highlights the responsibility of product manufacturers to decarbonise their products and work with their suppliers on this. So we need to be able to provide specifiers with options to help them meet their project sustainability objectives. So in Kingspan, our Planet Passionate programme aims to address the full product life cycle from raw materials through manufacturing down to end of life. And it was really important for us that our strategy covers the full value chain so we can actually deliver value to the customers in that final product, not only focusing on our own operations, but also working on that significant impact that comes from the upstream value chain. We work very closely with our suppliers to achieve this, targeting procurement of lower embodied carbon raw materials, as well as materials with high recycled content, and actually materials made through new manufacturing methodologies, because it can have such an impact. This has enabled us to develop the lower embodied carbon product range, which we now have 43 lower embodied carbon products across our portfolio, and they're available in 12 markets, of which the RMG 600 Plus is a part of. But this really gives us an example of how you can offer lower embodied carbon solutions with high recycled content across building fit out and building envelope.
On that topic, obviously when it comes to embodied carbon, a lot of the focus sort of jumps to the raw materials, but are there some less obvious decisions or early decisions that can also have big impacts on a structure's overall embodied carbon at the end?
To jump in on this, and kind of coming from a different perspective, but as a manufacturer, it's completely true. The majority of our embodied carbon does come from the raw materials we procure, which is why we work so closely with our suppliers. But it's also critical, us as a manufacturer, but also to ensure the full value chain is addressing their own impacts from manufacturing, as that's what's within our control, and it's not just a game of influence. So really, in that vein, like Kingspan, we've been focusing on Planet Passionate and decarbonising our own operations for the last 5 years since the beginning of the programme. We've delivered 600 projects over that period, and even 180 in 2025 alone. So we do know how much scale is required to actually deliver decarbonisation, even of our own footprint, which is a small proportion of our full value chain impact. Those projects kind of go from renewable energy procurement to generation, and we've 114 solar PV systems installed, which are directly generating renewable energy for the manufacture of our products, which is a great thing that we can kind of have, and it protects you kind of from the volatility of the energy market as well. And I suppose moving beyond that, what all of those projects have done is contribute to the reduction of the impact of our manufacturing. And we've already reduced our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 70% versus our 2020 base year. So that insight and kind of the challenges we've faced in enabling this kind of decarbonisation does give us some great experience. And there are a lot of the same challenges that we know are faced by our suppliers and our customers. So we can kind of bring that into conversations when we work together.
I think Holly's really touched on group level there, what we're looking at in terms of Planet Passionate and all the operational projects that we undertake. I suppose looking from a Tate kind of aspect, our manufacturing plant is in Hull, and that has 95% renewable energy. And this is through some of the things that Holly mentioned. So we have a biomass boiler, solar PV on the factory roof, bio-LPG and forklifts, and then procured renewable energy, which Holly touched on as well. We also have a rainwater harvesting facility, which last year collected 130,000 litres of rainwater. So all of those elements really aid us in reducing the operational carbon, which will then ultimately reduce the embodied carbon in our products.
I think it's actually great, Michael, that you mentioned the rainwater harvesting as well. And it's probably just to show we do go a little beyond, just focusing on energy and carbon. And, we look at circularity and the efficiency of our operations as well as rainwater harvesting. And Hull is a fantastic story of what can be done in one site and how that affects products.
Yeah, as you said, there's kind of so many different facets that need to be considered when it comes to building lower carbon structures. When it comes to making those decisions, who's involved and how do you kind of manage the collaborations between different departments in order to keep the focus on a project's carbon ambitions? Michael, if I start with you.
Yeah, so from a kind of project viewpoint, with all the complexities of construction in general, it's imperative that the various professional teams collaborate successfully. That kind of goes without saying. With the increasing pressure on the built environment to decarbonise, that early collaboration is really key to making informed decisions at the earliest stage, as that's where the biggest opportunity lies. So the encouraging part is that when teams do align early, so the people we're talking about there, architects, engineers, contractors, consultants, manufacturers like ourselves, amongst others, reducing embodied carbon doesn't feel like a constraint. It becomes part of delivering a better performing, more efficient, more future ready building. Looking at 40 Grosvenor in particular, those early decisions contributed to a saving of 170 tonnes of embodied carbon. And this was achieved through that early collaboration of the parties mentioned, and the continued collaboration through the tender process and then into the on-site delivery through the appointed main contractor. So in this case, it was BW Workplace Experts, and their buy-in and all parties, even the subcontractors, working towards that common goal is really key.
Just to jump in on that, Michael, from, I suppose, the group perspective, like you mentioned, so many stakeholders there that need to be aligned and involved in achieving a reduction, such as that 170 tonnes of embodied carbon for the building, which is fantastic. Just bringing it back to a building materials manufacturer perspective, and I know you face these challenges in Tate as well, it's critical that we provide robust environmental data through EPDs and environmental product declarations and recycled content information to all these stakeholders to actually enable them to choose products which align to the project goals. This is obviously a great case where that goal was set out from the beginning, but without the data, there's really no way for specifiers and other stakeholders to make decisions and understand those impacts. So from our perspective, we've been prioritising the development of EPDs across our portfolio for over 10 years now, both for standard products and also then for a lower embodied carbon version, so you can do that comparison between our own products. And this enables specifiers to compare those options, understand the trade-offs, because unfortunately there's always trade-offs in any project, and then quantify the impact choosing a specific product would actually have on the overall project in the end. And, you know, in this case, we're delighted that we were able to make choices that achieve that 170 tonne carbon reduction.
And Holly, coming back to you, you both mentioned kind of the importance of circularity in this project and more generally when it comes to cutting carbon. But what did circular construction look like in practice beyond the sort of headline concept?
Yeah, really good question. And I think it's even just breaking down that circular construction concept because, you know, as we all know, it's really high level and it's a huge portfolio of things that actually sit within that. And from our kind of group perspective, what we focus on is designing products with long lifespans, looking at adaptability of those products in the long term, enabling reuse and then material recovery or elements of product recovery at end of life to avoid material leakage, which is both, you know, a cost saving as well as a material saving. And that then in turn helps reduce reliance on virgin materials through recycled content. From my side anyway, I think this project is a great example because it's not theoretical, we're seeing it in action, but you're also seeing two distinct solutions work together, but both contributing to circularity. By using the reuse panels, you're showing how you can reuse a product exactly as is in a new building or in a renovation such as this, and then also looking at using the new lower embodied carbon products at the same time. But these are new products, but they contain 91% recycled content. So it's two very distinct solutions, both helping increase the circularity of the project in their own way. And I think it really highlights that there's no one answer to transitioning to a more circular ways of building, and each product or project can really require its own unique solution. And like long term, more circular construction is going to depend on a suite of solutions, having appropriate infrastructure in place, take back schemes, material traceability, got cooperation across the whole value chain. Like there's so many things that need to be in place for this to work. And I think it's great to see it in practice here with this reuse panel. And it's something that we're very focused on from a group perspective, but also within Tate. And it's where we continue to invest from Kingspan.
Yeah, I completely agree, Holly. Just to add to that, as well as reuse in action today, so obviously we're seeing that at 40 Grosvenor and other upcoming projects, the newly manufactured products that are part of that hybrid system, so the RMG 600 panels that are manufactured as new and put into that building, they also have the potential to be the future reused materials. They are essentially going into a building which could be called a material bank. That's a term that we're seeing a lot. Obviously, we don't want to see them being reused too soon, because the idea is that building has hopefully 60 to 100 years design life, but they are there and they can be reused, just like the panels that we're seeing today, which are some of them as old as me.
Bringing back that durability there, Michael.
About me or the panels?
And Michael, coming back to you, Holly's already mentioned the trade-offs that sometimes have to happen when it comes to either carbon or sustainability more generally. Were there specific moments in this project where those other considerations really came into tension, and how were they handled against the broader carbon reduction goals?
Yeah, so inevitably all construction projects will have an element of tension as the delivery teams are looking to ensure best value for the client. We've all heard about roundtable discussions and impassioned conversations going on, and this is whether low carbon solutions are being considered or not. When it comes to newly manufactured low carbon products such as Tate RMG 600 Plus, it is commonplace to benchmark it against the norm. So whether that's on cost or carbon content, and by the norm I mean, for example, our standard RMG products, the one we've been selling into the marketplace since 1992, I think. So the RMG 600 Plus is the lower carbon version of that. So again, early engagement is key to aligning the understanding of that kind of benchmarking and which direction the client wants to go. And on 40 Grosvenor, those decisions were made at an early enough stage that everyone could then buy in. So by early enough, I mean that when it came through to tendering for main contractors, they were already on board with decisions that had been made. So therefore the tensions already had a kind of underlying answer to what the priority was. With reuse systems, timing is an extremely pivotal consideration, especially if existing assets are being used. So by that I mean the existing raised access floor panels in this case that are within the building. At 40 Grosvenor, the existing building remained weathertight, so it wasn't a full facade replacement or something like that. And therefore the site itself could be used as a material bank, and this allowed for the existing panels that had been validated for reuse to be stored on site and then installed in line with the building programme. Now, they may have had to move around inside the building to allow other trades to progress, but they have that luxury. Other projects that Tate are working on do not have that luxury, and off-site storage costs are very high, and therefore on-site reuse may not be viable, and that might be purely due to the cost of logistics and storage. And therefore the option for the client is to potentially sell their assets into the second-hand panel market. It's a very competitive market out there, and obviously that will replenish stocks for Tate and others to then be able to offer reuse panels from stock rather than just using existing assets in the same building. And again, early collaboration can help to manage expectations on reuse potential, allowing budget cost and carbon calculations to best reflect what is realistic and viable. So hopefully if it's been done early enough, those tensions, as I say, have got some reassurance from earlier conversation.
And for any organisations that might be listening who are kind of looking to start or have already started their own commercial refurbishment projects, what one decision around embodied carbon that you think kind of needs to happen as early as possible? And is there anything that you'd maybe do differently if you were going to, or when you do a similar project to 40 Grosvenor again?
Yeah, so ultimately setting project targets for embodied carbon, or even going further and setting package specific targets, is an early decision that will shape all future conversations. That said, the ambition for reuse, for example, needs to be managed alongside realistic deliverables, which is where the early collaboration comes into play. And for me, that's where all the interesting conversations happen, and the challenges are there to bring everyone together. So tying this into my answer from your previous question, if you are considering material reuse, specifically with raised flooring, set your ambition, so that can be as high as you want really. So a lot of clients are challenging us and saying we want 100% of what we've got as an existing asset to go back in. That's not necessarily going to be realistic. So what you've got to do is ensure you've qualified the suitability of the assets at the earliest opportunity and outline the potential logistical challenges that may present themselves. So Tate, as part of our offer, we can do next day site visits. This will be to identify and validate existing assets. We can also analyse photographs. So obviously if it's time pressured and we can't get to site, then let's have a look at some photographs. What's printed on the side of the panel? When was it made? What line was it made on? All that information will be there from certainly the panels we've manufactured. And this type of auditing and surveying is quite commonplace in the market. So we'll see other material sets and assets like suspended metal ceilings, lighting or structural steel having the same work put into them. If the materials are unfortunately not suitable for reuse, and this could be down to a number of different reasons, this can be outlined quickly and other options can be considered. So what I mentioned before in terms of selling products onto the second-hand market, or obviously swapping your ambition for reuse to a lower carbon solution like RMG 600 Plus. And this will manage the expectations of all parties early on.
I think it's really interesting, Michael, you just brought up material traceability there and how critical it is to actually enabling reuse. You need to know what that product is, how old it is, etc. So it's a great example of that actually working in practice. From my perspective, and I think, Michael, you've probably covered a good bit of this already, but defining specific sustainability targets and being clear on what good looks like is absolutely critical here. If you're in the middle of a project, the kind of goal of maintaining sustainability in a project brief when it's just a generic principle can be incredibly hard. And, be sustainable isn't going to win any arguments when those tensions inevitably arise. So it needs to be something specific and measurable. So setting out a number, whether that's an embodied carbon target, a percentage reduction versus a baseline or a previous project, a certain proportion of reused or recycled materials, but something tangible that everyone can understand, not just the sustainability experts in the project. Even talking about like aligning with wider frameworks such as LEED or BREEAM and WELL as a part of this project, breaking those frameworks down so you know what's actually required to achieve the targeted rating that you're looking for, I think is really critical. And it really kind of brings everyone into the project, because inevitably there's going to be trade-offs that need to be made to achieve that targeted certification. So understanding what they could look like is critical. And I suppose just an additional piece from me on this side, leaning on the expertise of your supply partners. I think kind of from hearing from yourself, Michael, we're already catching up a lot of insight into what can be done and what solutions are actually already available on the market from your suppliers, whether that's a lower embodied carbon product, a reused product, or even bio-based products, depending on what your priorities are. An early engagement with your supply partner or potentially multiple supply partners to evaluate these options, I think can be really helpful. From a Kingspan perspective, sustainability is really embedded in our business. Like, we've been on this journey for over 15 years, and we launched Planet Passionate in 2019, which has enabled us to reduce our carbon footprint by 70% for scope 1 and 2, as I already mentioned, but also our scope 3 by 24%. And we do have global operations with sustainability leaders across the business. And this also gives us visibility of different regional approaches to sustainability challenges, such as, tackling your embodied carbon or your operational carbon or circularity. And this experience means we kind of understand the operational, technical and real commercial realities of decarbonisation, as we've probably mentioned a number of times now, Michael, the trade-offs that are key and how you break down those targets being critical. But from our side, we partner with customers, which enables us to bring that expertise to their projects and hopefully help them achieve their sustainability goals as well.
Well, great. Thank you so much, both. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for this segment of the Sustainability Uncovered podcast. But thank you so much again for taking the time to share your insights today.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matilda.
So big thank you again to Holly and Michael for their time. We're going to take a really short break now, but don't go anywhere, because next up we'll be talking with Jonathan Lee, who's the Director of Structures at Canary Wharf Group, to find out how a project they've been working on is turning coffee into carbon capturing concrete. Hello and welcome back to the Sustainability Uncovered podcast with me, Matilda, and with Sidhi.
Hello.
So keeping the focus on cutting emissions in the built environment, there's so many exciting things happening in the world of innovation. And for our next interview, I sat down with Jonathan Lee to discuss an exciting project with CWG and Wholesome UK, which saw the pair take spent coffee grounds and turn them into low carbon building materials. So here's that conversation in full now. So Jonathan, thank you so much for joining. Just as a bit of an introduction for the listeners, could you explain a bit about Canary Wharf Group's project with Wholesome UK and what makes it such a breakthrough?
Yes, hi Matilda. Canary Wharf Group are in quite a unique position where we basically look after the entire life cycle of a project. So not only do we deal with the development side, but we also have a construction arm. So it puts us in a unique position where we've got access to our full supply chain value. And that means we can have early engagement, a lot more early collaborations. So we've embraced that opportunity by reaching out directly to our suppliers, which generally isn't a relationship that a developer and a supplier has. So by breaking down those barriers, we've been able to access the right people to be able to help us with this challenge about decarbonising the construction and the development that we're doing. So by being able to establish these relationships, we've been able to have access to their latest innovations. And with our projects and our pipelines, we can then pair that, the innovation piece in terms of technology and materials to how can you apply it in the real world on a project in a building. And that's the key thing that has been the enabler for us to look at projects in a different way and how we can then work up the right strategy from the very beginning of our project with that right mindset that we want to do the right thing to lower the embodied carbon in our projects by reaching out to the right people at the right time.
And in terms of the specific project with Wholesome UK, you refer to it as this bio-espresso mix. So how does that actually work, and how do coffee grounds and biochar turn concrete, which is traditionally a super carbon intensive material, into a carbon sink?
Yeah, so there's a great story behind this bio-espresso terminology about this concrete mix that we've developed. So we had a very unique project where it wasn't a building, it was an art piece, a really big 12-meter tall, 12-meter wide, life-size blue whale sculpture that we decided to procure. And the messaging behind that sculpture, because it was created from ocean plastic waste, and it wanted to highlight the plight of the amount of plastic waste floating in our oceans and it becoming such an environmental issue that we wanted to do something special to respect that messaging in terms of how we were going to design the structure and the foundation to support that. So this is where this opportunity of looking at materials in a different way with the concrete. So the concrete was a great opportunity to trial this biochar concrete. So biochar is made from any organic matter. So the logic goes is that any organic bio-waste will degrade and then release CO2 back into the atmosphere. If you put that organic material through a process called pyrolysis, where you heat it in the absence of oxygen, you basically suspend the carbon in that material and change it into a charcoal. So that charcoal then is a pure carbon, which you can grind down into a fine powder. And what we've done with Wholesome is that they've blended it in with concrete, and it stabilizes the concrete. It doesn't have any particular disadvantages. There are some interesting characteristics where it essentially enhances the concrete as well. But by mixing it in with the concrete is a very robust, stable material. And by doing that, you permanently lock that carbon into the concrete. And it's a great way in which you can sequester carbon from it going into the atmosphere by, permanently locking it into concrete. So that blend and that idea of combining this two-way of offsetting carbon works very well, especially when we put it into foundation, which is a very long-term structure that stays in the ground for, hundreds of years. So the idea is that we wanted to trial this biochar, but we wanted to do it in a different way. So because we own an estate and we manage a lot of the waste from our retailers, we challenged Wholesome and said, well, if you could make it from any organic material, could you potentially make it from the spent coffee grounds that we collect? And we did a trial, and it proved it can be made into biochar. So that was an enhanced way in which we can look at biochar in a different way in terms of curating it from a waste stream that we manage on our estate. And that's how we've been able to convert the spent coffee into biochar concrete. And therefore we've got this terminology about bio-espresso, which, goes really well in terms of getting the people to get excited about what we're doing, but then it comes together with the messaging of the sculpture that we've put up.
I mean, it's such an interesting project. And kind of zooming out, why is embodied carbon such a critical issue for developers right now? Obviously, there's the kind of energy efficiency operational piece, but embodied carbon seems to be cropping up more and more in the conversation.
So I think it's becoming a lot more prominent for developers who are now understanding the impact that they can have. And embodied carbon gives developers the opportunity to control that narrative, whereas operational emissions is affected by your tenants, how they want to use their energy. So you have less scope to control that amount of carbon with operational. With the embodied carbon, we have the opportunity to be thoughtful about the materials that we use, the design and the construction process. So that gives us a lot of control and narrative in terms of being mindful of what we can do to lower that embodied carbon for that building, right? So if you have that foresight about wanting to do it productively, the early engagement piece that I mentioned earlier and the collaboration can really come to fruition, right? By setting that precedence of doing things in the right way, in a considered way to lower the embodied carbon, because you have that influence at the beginning.
And obviously the kind of materials industry in general is rife with innovation. There's loads of incredible ideas, but a lot of these sustainable materials don't tend to get past the pilot stage for whatever reason. What's enabled you to deploy these kind of solutions on live construction sites?
Yeah, this is a major challenge. Having a great idea doesn't necessarily transpire to it being widely used. And I think we've done it in a pragmatic way in terms of taking incremental steps. So, for example, from taking it from the learnings that we've got from the sculpture piece on a small scale, and then transitioning into trialing this material on a segment of our structure. For example, the slabs that we've done using biochar and other novel concrete mixes. And I think it's really important that you bring your supply chain on that journey with you, because there's a lot of learning process. So, with innovation, it starts in the lab, but you need to do it in the real world conditions for it to really have a chance to understand what are the issues and how can it be improved to suit the wider mass use. So we've taken incremental step each time to get that learning, to bring everybody up to speed in terms of the nuances, the issues, so that we're learning from each experience and we're staging it up into a place where everybody is comfortable and are familiar with how these new mixes work and how it can then transition, right? And that key word is about transitioning from this testing to real life application.
And on the topic of incremental growth when it comes to innovation, how commercially viable and how scalable do you think this new concrete mix is compared to traditional materials? And what might need to change more broadly for solutions like this to become more standard?
Yes, so commercial is a big issue. So if it's not affordable, it's going to not take off. And with these very innovative materials, there isn't an established production line or process there. So it's very artisan. So it's not cost effective at the moment. But it can't scale without there being a demand. So we're very fortunate being the client where we can set the standard, set the bar in terms of what we want to try to achieve. And we can absorb some of that cost on some of our projects. But I think it's taking that step forward and understanding that something has to change. And by going through the process, you will then have a better understanding what the challenges are, right, at hand, so that then you can work out a strategy to help facilitate things to work in a much better way so that it can then become more affordable. So, for example, with the biochar, it's a one-man band who's making this biochar. So in terms of scaling up, in terms of the volumes that we need for the type of projects that we build, it's not commercially viable at the minute. But by doing this process and these trials, showing that there's demand there and the excitement that it brings in terms of using circular economy, changing waste into a more productive material, has got people more interested. So that meant POSIM now are going out, looking at different industries where biochar is being made as a byproduct of another process at scale. So, for example, where people are using it as a source of energy and are not realizing the quantity of biochar that they're making is actually a viable new material that can be used in a different way, such as in concrete. You create that opportunity from that demand signal that we've created, right? And by establishing the demand there, the projects that can use and apply these technologies, it starts to grow. And the more it grows and it becomes its own ecosystem, then you create the market for it. And that's how it can scale and it becomes more viable.
And looking ahead, what do you think maybe the next frontier is for cutting carbon in construction, and where do you see potentially the industry going over the next few years?
So speaking from our own experience and the things that we've been doing, I think buzzword is AI. And I think instead of fearing it in terms of it replacing jobs, we look at it as a potential new tool to aid what we're doing, because the compute power of AI will be exponential. If you look at it as a tool like how we have, it can unlock a different way in which you design and build. So currently, we're really hindered by standards, which are based on decades of results and how people do things. So the standards updating to the new ways of incorporating new materials is very slow. So it's not that compatible. AI and data will help you unlock that by going down a performance-based route, by evidencing what the material can actually do. So with all the low carbon materials that we've been doing, we've been embracing technology. We've been incorporating structural health monitoring. We've been using fiber optics in terms of embedding it into the concrete. So we get deep insight to the behaviors of how the concrete is working, right? The issue is about when you use these new materials, there's always this hesitancy to say, well, is it going to do something different than what standard concrete is doing? But if you have that insight and collect that data to say that it's doing what it's supposed to do, in fact, it's performing even better than what normal concrete is doing, and you have that data and you have that compute power to demonstrate how it can be projected and predicted in the future, it's going to help supercharge how we design things, fine-tune efficiencies in the way that we can build better, design better. So I think by embracing technology and innovation, not just in terms of materials, but in terms of technology, and combining that all together in terms of how we deliver and design our developments, that's going to be the new frontier of how we can unlock these new potentials.
Really interesting to hear. So it's not just going to be the next gen materials that are reshaping construction. It's also the sort of the digital systems that underpin everything could be just as, if not more, transformative.
Yeah. That's right. I mean, I think, my career has been varied in that I've worked both as a contractor and a consultant. So I understand both sides of the fence, and sitting as the development side, I've always embraced this cross-pollination of ideas and thoughts and collaboration, right? And that goes with different industries and sectors. By us engaging with academia, where they're really at the cutting edge and trying new things, it's opened our eyes to this new way of monitoring. And we've given the universities opportunities to work with us to incorporate these technologies on our projects so that we can get real life data, not lab data, right? So you're testing in real conditions, and that then gives the validity to what we're doing. And from this, we're learning so much more things that we haven't thought about. And that's how things can flourish and grow and become better and improve.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. But thank you so much, Jonathan, for your time.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
So thanks to Jonathan again. That brings our guest interviews for today's episode to an end. It was great to talk to all three of the guests today and kind of see how decarbonising can work in practice, both from sort of a more scalable commercial point of view, but then also this more creative solutions that are coming out that Jonathan talked about. So before Sidhi and I sign off, there are just a few things we want to flag. So in terms of our first interview with Kingspan and Tate Global, we've also got a recording of a recent webinar on the topic of embodied carbon and moving from measurement to implementation. So by the time this episode is live and you're listening, that will be up on edie.net, and that's free to access. And in terms of what we've got coming up, Sidhi, it's fitting, well, that both the projects we've spotlighted today are London-based, but also that we're out in central London today because, of course, we've got London Climate Action Week coming up, and that is coming around quickly.
Yeah, no, it is so exciting. I've been a part of 2 London Climate Action Weeks now, and it's only getting bigger every year. So I'm really looking forward to it. We're still in the process of mapping out our plans, but something that I can confirm at this stage is that we're gonna have a special exclusive podcast episode, which will be just around Climate Action Week and how our businesses in London participating in the week, but then also wider conversations around their climate and environmental initiatives and goals. And yeah, we'll be you and I, because we're both based in London, we're going to be out and about, attending events, meeting people, learning more about their challenges and their upcoming focus areas as well. So listeners, if you are hosting, organizing, or just want to say hi to us, do drop us an email at newsdesk@faf-house.com. And yeah, we'll just be around, we'll catch up.
And we've also got our members drinks.
Yeah, that is true. I know Matt's leading on that. But yeah, we'll have some exclusive drinks events for our members during the week as well, which we'll share more information about very soon. So members, please stay tuned. And then in terms of what to watch out on our site, we'll be doing more when we know about the SBTi net zero standards, so do keep an eye out for that. And then also Bond, and yeah, we're gonna have so many exclusive written coverage and content around London Climate Action Week as well, which we're very excited to eventually put out for you guys, so stay tuned.
Yeah, a lot going on, but all exciting stuff. As Sidhi mentioned, the next episode of Sustainability Uncovered is going to be an El-Core special, so we'll be on the ground, running around London and chatting with some special guests. So
yeah, hopefully it's not 38 degrees and we're
oh my God. Then we might not be running.
Then I might not be running.
No.
Just crawling.
Yeah, stay tuned for that. So for today, it's a goodbye from Sidhi.
Goodbye.
And a goodbye from me. Goodbye.